like to welcome you all to this fourth session of the Civic Leadership Academy, sponsored by the American Democracy Project of IU South Bend and the St. Joseph County Public Library, with the volunteer support of IU South Bend's Political Science Club. This week's topic is the legislative process influencing local, state, and national policy debates. And what we will do this evening is to quickly review the basic procedure by which an idea becomes a bill and then a law at the national, state, county, and city levels. And of course, there are variations depending on exactly what community you live in, but this will give you a very good idea of how that process takes place and where you as a citizen or you as part of a group of interested and organized citizens might intervene in that process. So last week we talked a little bit about contacting elected officials, getting some advice on different ways to do that and the preferences that different elected officials may have. And this week we look in a bit more detail at the policymaking process. We don't want to bog you down in all of the details. This is the second reading, this is the third reading, here's what might be more likely to happen at this level than that level necessarily, but at least give you a basic overview. And so we're very, very glad you're here. We want to leave time at the end for your questions for our panelists. And so we are very, very glad you're here. You can see on the screen our guests. John Broughton, who many of you in this area, of course, will know, was the District 10 Senator for the state of Indiana for many years. And so we're delighted that he has agreed to come and join us, even though he's serving in a new capacity at this time. So he's very, very familiar with this process from personal experience. Also speaking to us as, based on their experiences with the process, are Mark Catanzarite from the St. Joseph County Council and Oliver Davis from the South Bend Common Council. So municipal level government, county level government, state level government. And I will talk to you a little bit about the federal level process. And you have a handout that gives you more detail and a glossary of terms if you want to get into some of the nitty-gritty that you might hear on C-SPAN or any of the other networks you're watching, newspapers you're reading, and you're not quite sure what some of those terms might mean. That will go into more detail than we can get into in our little quick 10 minutes each that we have here this evening. I would request that you once again fill out your survey for us. That's how we're tracking your attendance and how many people have attended. And do let us know what you would like us to do next. When we finish this series, we'll be eager to start something new. And so we would encourage you to join us for the final two events in this series on protesting and on solving community problems. Same place, same time, right here in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to minimize that for a moment just so that we can talk a little bit about the federal process of how a bill becomes a law. And what we can see here is that it does start with an idea. And certainly during Q&A, there may be some questions about where those ideas come from and how an idea gets heard, but it really is an idea. Sometimes of one person, sometimes a group of people, certainly sometimes interest groups, lobbying groups, corporations as well, but it could come from anywhere. Then it gets introduced as a bill into the House or the Senate. If it's a revenue bill that's going to require taxation, it needs to go first to the House and originate in the House. Otherwise, it really can go to either chamber. We see then that it will be discussed and debated in committee. And that's where you hear about people testifying. The committee might refer to a subcommittee. They would then send it back to the committee because the subcommittee cannot send it directly to the floor. And then what will happen is that that committee that has some jurisdiction over the bill would be able to decide whether or not to refer it to the floor. Most bills will die in committee. Some, it's because a member of Congress might say, oh yes, that ought to be a law. I will introduce your bill into the chamber. I'll be happy to do so. And they know it might not go anywhere. About 95% of bills will die in committee. So not too many are going to make it out to the floor. If they do make it to the floor, there will be a vote and there will be discussion and debate. It's a little bit different in the House and the Senate, with the House having strict time limits and rules of debate. Whereas the Senate, you sometimes hear about the filibuster. That's where a member of the Senate can talk and talk and talk, read from the phone book, do whatever they would like to do in an attempt to kill the bill. The Senate can then invoke closure. They can get 3/5 of the chamber to end that filibuster, and that way they can force a vote. There's been a lot of debate over whether or not to get rid of the filibuster. There's also been some recent rule changes that you've heard about regarding, for example, the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Gorsuch, who was confirmed by the Senate after a rule change so that it wouldn't have to be a supermajority, but only a bare majority, 50% plus one. So the Senate can change their rules. They can close amendments or open them. The House, things are a lot tighter. It's a much bigger chamber, 435 versus 100. And so they really are strict in terms of who can speak and that what you put on must be germane. It can't be an irrelevant writer that you just want to put through to bring home the pork, for example, for your district if it's not relevant to the bill. So there are some minor differences, but the key thing for citizens to know is that really at any of these processes, at any of these time periods, you can be calling your members of Congress, you can be calling committee chairs, you can be lobbying with groups and organizations and sending in letters, making phone calls, emailing, signing petitions, all of the kinds of things we talked about last week. It will ultimately need to go to the other chamber. In most cases, a simple resolution wouldn't, but those generally aren't the things that we as citizens are interested in that really change our lives. And then we see that the other chamber will follow essentially the same procedure. If they are successful, and they also pass the bill, there's still another hurdle, which is that both chambers actually have to pass the same version of the bill for it to become a law or an act. And so what happens is they'll go to a conference committee, both sides will fight for their version. Ultimately they know part of the pie is better than none at all, and so they'll have to reconcile those differences, and then both chambers will again vote on that conference committee report. Only if they approve it will it go to the president. The president can sign the bill, showing support. It'll become a law. Take no action. If Congress is still in session after 10 days, it becomes a law without the president's signature. Can veto it, sending back objections, or pocket veto. What a pocket veto means that the president doesn't take an action because he knows, someday she will know, right? He knows that, hey, this Congress is going to be adjourned. You're going to have to start all over next time. So he doesn't actually physically veto it, but it has the same effect. So there are actually, we think of signature or veto, there are actually these 4 options. Now, checks and balances being what they are, Congress would have an opportunity to override the veto, but that would require 2/3 in both chambers. As we think about that 2/3 and why there aren't more vetoes and veto overrides, keep in mind that the president and members of Congress, of course, know these rules very well, and so they're counting. The whips in the House, the whips in the Senate are counting votes, seeing if they have the votes to actually pass the legislation before they ever do it. Similarly, the president is looking, and if they know, the president said, I'm going to veto, and they don't have the 2/3 vote, they might say, let's try again, or let's pull this bill, because it can be pulled at any step in the process, as we saw with the recent attempt to create a new health care bill. And so what happens there is that the president also may decide not to veto if he knows there'll be an override, because that's pretty embarrassing for the president, unless he just wanted to make a point of going on record to oppose a bill. Okay, so that's the basics that most of you will be familiar with, and for many of you, you may have learned this in school. Either you were a kid in the early to mid 70s like I was, and you were, watching, or you're a parent showing your kids, or maybe you're slightly younger, you caught the YouTube version, okay? So, as a very quick, nostalgic tour.
Your body grows bigger,
your mind loves power.
it's great to learn.
'Cause knowledge is power. It's Schoolhouse Rocking, the chip off the block of your favorite schoolhouse rock.
I'm just a bill.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm gonna live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so
Just a bill.
Simplified version. Now, there are some other resources online that give you a little bit more detail and also are fun to watch, and I will email this document to everybody. That's one of the reasons we collect those emails. So when we send your next reminder, we'll also send you a link to the information for our Facebook page or pictures and videos, but also to these resources. One of them is a crash course in government and politics by PBS Digital Studio. Some of you who know me know I might be a bit partial towards PBS. It's a good little sub-minute video that complicates things just a little bit. There's also a nice detailed version that goes through and gets at all these terms in your handout and talks a little bit about the fact that there are different kinds of bills and different kinds of resolutions. And it's one of those where the person's writing on a piece of paper while you're watching it. So it's really good, lots of clear words and pictures on the page. So that's a good one if you are ready to think a little bit more about it or teach it to a child who's a little bit older. And then there's, of course, the parodies that I put in here because of some of the discussion last week as we were talking with the elected officials about your frustration about getting form letters back, your concerns that it's really money rather than citizens who are affecting the process, etc. So there are, of course, lots of parodies on the I'm Just a Bill. There's a critical perspective by Kate Hart that looks at some of the negative effects of lobbying, but in the end says, ultimately, though, we need to hold people accountable, right? And then, of course, there's the really, really brutal Alec Rock, somebody mentioned Alec last week, the notion that you have groups or corporations who are simply writing legislation, giving it to state legislators and federal governments, and then people are cut out entirely, which is the more depressing version of what folks say is happening. We see some cases, some policy areas where that does seem to be the case, particularly if there are majorities of people who feel some way about a law or policy, but they're not voting, they're not active, they're not engaged on that issue. On the other hand, we see cases where there's big money poured into a particular ballot initiative or a piece of legislation, and the public is so opposed to it, or factions are split, recently with healthcare, for example, where they just realize that, wait, I'm vulnerable, my people are speaking out against this, I can't take this vote. So I think there's still room for people in the process. So I've included some of those based on your comments for you to think about and consider. But also I would say the point of this academy is civic leadership, that we certainly can't give up on the democracy, even if we feel it doesn't always represent the will of the people. So I will stop there so we have time to learn more about those levels that you may know a little bit less about, and we'll start with the state level, county level, and then go to the city level.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bennion. Frankly, a lot of what Dr. Bennion said about Congress actually applies to the General Assembly in terms of process, and actually the Schoolhouse Rock thing was very appropriate. So maybe for brevity's sake, I'll kind of highlight just a few things that are maybe unique about the General Assembly and ways that I think would be very helpful for people who are looking to try to have a bill become a law. One of the first things is that the Indiana General Assembly, if you want to have your legislature file a bill, because we're a part-time legislature, there's beauties about being a part-time legislature. And for example, I experienced this, and I overwhelmingly thought it was an exceptionally positive thing. 8 or 9 months out of the year, your state legislator is right here in your community. They're at the ballparks. They may be at church, may or may not be, depending. They're at the supermarket. Their kids may be in your schools. You see them around. One of the beauties about the state of Indiana is many professions are represented in the General Assembly. It is a true citizen legislature, and it's a true part-time legislature. Now, one of the downsides of that is, if you're like, I want to file this should be a bill, and I want my legislator to file this bill. oftentimes I would experience, and I had to advise many frustrated constituents who, they would tend to call you when there was news about the General Assembly. And that's generally January, February, and March. And so I would get these calls like January 5th saying, hey, you're going down there next week to start the session. You know, can you file this bill? I was like, well, no, actually the deadline for me to even submit a bill to the Legislative Service Agency who prepares legislation for all 150 legislators is generally around December 13th. The bill filing deadline may be like January 12th or January 19th, but if you haven't submitted that bill for a fiscal note, for preparation by the attorneys, and so people sometimes would be very frustrated because they'd already missed the deadline when they heard the General Assembly was in session. So if you're interested in a particular piece of legislation actually becoming law, the best time to frankly contact your legislator is when they've kind of just finished a session, or maybe June, July, August, or even September before they're getting ready to go back down. You know, there's still several months but prior to the holidays and such, because in general we would submit our requests for bills before Thanksgiving. It was usually around December 5th or so. You had to have those in to the Legislative Services Agency. So always keep in mind, don't wait until the legislative session starts, because frankly it's too late. Now of course there's always another session, and frankly I see Cheryl Ashford sitting in the front row, unless you're on an issue that is incredibly hot, or you happen to have a local legislator who maybe chairs a committee or something like that. Seldom do laws that are filed in the very first session become law in that very first session. They tend to have to percolate, and that's just a fact of the matter. Not every issue, but you have to be patient. It generally takes, I know some legislation I was very happy to be a part of, which was turning the Studebaker corridor into a community redevelopment and enhancements district, which, you know, now 15, 18 years later, we're really seeing the fruits of that legislation. But that took 3 sessions to get done. The first residential property tax abatement outside of Marion County over in the Eddy Street area was legislation that the late Jeff Gibney came up with. He trekked down Indianapolis 3 or 4 winters in a row with his slideshow and said, here's what we want to do, and we want to have mixed housing, and we want to have retail. And he was with South Bend Heritage at the time. It was before he'd even started with the city. Finally, that became law, but it took several attempts at it. So unfortunately, patience is required. Probably the biggest difference between Congress, well, actually I should add, another big similarity, and there's good and bad to this, but that is, and it was referenced, of course, in the Schoolhouse Rock thing, and Professor Venue mentioned, the biggest winnower, if you will, the biggest funnel that prevents legislation from becoming law is bills getting a hearing. Each year in the Indiana General Assembly, there's probably about, I don't know, Marilyn, what do you say, maybe 1,200 to 1,700 bills that are filed, maybe like 1,000 in the House, 500 in the Senate. That's kind of a normal year. Of those 1,500 bills, I think it's safe to say probably 200 get a hearing, maybe less, depending on whether it's a short or long session. So about 80 to 85% of bills die because they don't get a hearing from the committee chair. Now, at first I thought, well, this is an outrage. Then when you read those bills, you're like, well, maybe this isn't all bad, actually. So sometimes you're frustrated because you can't get a hearing for your bill, but there's some pretty crazy stuff that fortunately just, you know, stays in a hopper somewhere. But that's sort of a part of the process. I mean, sometimes almost all of your effort needs to be spent on building up either grassroots support, building statewide support, providing pressure points, all on the committee chairperson, because the committee chairperson can say, I'm not going to give that bill a hearing. And if the committee chairperson, if he or she does that, that bill is unequivocally dead in the House, because if you try to do some if you try to do an amendment process in the House, they have a rule called the bill pending rule. And it's generally strictly enforced on both sides of the aisle, both Republican and Democrat, if it's out of respect for the committee chair. If the committee chair has chosen not to hear that bill, either the speaker who's presiding or the committee chair, him or herself, can go to the mic and say, this bill is either the same or substantially identical to a bill that I chose not to hear, and it's ruled out of order. In the Senate, it's more of a custom than it is a rule, and the committee chair might grouse and grumble, but sometimes you can get a bill through what's called a Second Amendment process, which is where if any any member of the Senate wants to offer an amendment, they can. But again, that hurdle to getting a committee hearing is probably the biggest hurdle that any bill faces. Beyond that, it's kind of the same thing. One thing that's a little different than Congress, and maybe it's just as chaotic, but actually you can almost set your clock for it. Today is, starting next week, I would expect, or the week after, is a so-called conference committee process. And that's when bills do have to be reconciled. In Indianapolis, just like in Congress, a identical language at some point or another has to pass both the House and the Senate chamber. Now, the conference committee process in the Senate and the House in Indianapolis, that's when what we call lobbyists, that's when they make their money, so to speak, because it's when the public is most shut out of the process, and it's when things happen very quickly. And that is, you'll have language that has passed one chamber but maybe didn't get a hearing in another chamber can be taken and submitted into another bill, and these conference committee reports are getting voted on. Oftentimes you have 6 or 7 bills that have been jammed into one conference committee report. Really the last 2 weeks of the Indiana General Assembly process are when I would get frustrated, and I think a number of legislators did, because things change so fast, they happen so fast, and the public is largely shut out of the process. The conference committee hearings generally happen once, and they're kind of for show, and then after that. So that's when, if you're interested in legislation, it becomes very difficult. While the General Assembly tends to get incredibly high remarks, and deservedly so, for being public, being open, you can watch things. I've been doing it this session a little bit. You just tune in and watch live. Most of the committee hearings are live. But the conference committee process in the last 2 weeks of the General Assembly is when things happen very, very quickly and often without public oversight. And you find out about it, frankly, the day after session ended. But in general, again, I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of the opportunities that we're very fortunate here in Indiana, that we are a citizen legislature. Legislators have pretty bare bones staff, and so you can have a lot of input by interacting with your General Assembly member, and they generally are very accessible, whether it's third House meetings through the chamber, whether it's, I know IUSB always has a breakfast where I don't think it's kept private, always tends to get very good attendance from General Assembly members. Usually it's before we go down to session, and there's a whole host of opportunities. And for example, I always made it a point to speak when I was invited by group. The Martin Luther King Senior Men's Club would oftentimes invite legislators. There's just a whole host of opportunities actually to interact with your General Assembly members, and you should take advantage of that because it does have a lot of input. So with just ending with a little Mark Twain quip that could apply to the General Assembly, and with about 2 or 3 weeks to go before you can rest assured, he had the great quote, "No man's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature is in session." And never could it be said better. So I certainly be happy to answer any question, but that's kind of a broad overview of the General Assembly process.
Wonderful, very, very useful. And now we will hear a little bit from Mark Catanzarite about what might be different or what we should know about county level policymaking.
Thank you, Doctor. Much like my counterpart, my colleague, Judge Broden, sitting next to me, much of what Dr. Binion said about the federal process is somewhat applicable to the county process. We also, we're your local branch of county government. If everybody in here pays taxes in St. Joseph County or any county you live in by chance, you'll be represented by a county council member. So in St. Joe County, there's 9 individual county council districts. So I'm one of 9 members of the county council. And if you pay, if you own a property, if you own a vehicle and you pay a wheel tax, you're represented by a county council person because we are the persons that legislate how that money is spent. So on the county level, anybody, I think, I'll speak for myself, but I generally think all of us 9 county council members are very accessible. I think last week you had council member Diana Hess. Was she here with you, Doctor, last week? Okay. She's one of my colleagues. We tend to be local people. A couple of us 9 are retired, but the other 7 are full-time employees, and we work full-time jobs. So we tend to be accessible. Our phone numbers are easy to get a hold of. You can call our administrative assistant at the county council. And in a minute I'll get up, if Doctor will allow me, I'll show you the county's website, how you can get a hold of the county council through the county website. But we have a very streamlined process. I mean, potentially, if all the county council members agreed and 48 hours notice was given, potentially we could pass a bill and create a law in the county within 48 hours if we wanted to. We don't generally take that route. That might be like a state of emergency that might be declared. So that might be the only time we might exercise that option. But typically, it's about minimally a 2-month process to get something changed in county government. It starts out as an idea. Either a citizen comes forward, like Schoolhouse Rock or any other legislative body. Citizen comes forward, they have an idea about something they want to change or improve, and they get a hold of their county council member, and together with that citizen or with that group, we'll draft a bill. And from that point, we'll take the bill, and if it's acceptable to the person that proposed it, we'll take it to the county council, and we'll introduce that bill at a county council meeting. Part of our rules are a bill has to have two readings before it can be passed into a law in the county. So typically, we had a county council meeting last night. We had first readings last night. So bills that were brand new were given a first reading last night, so we didn't act on those. The presider of our county council meetings is our president. Currently, it's Raphael Morton. He assigned those bills last night to a particular committee. We have 4 standing committees in the county council. Human Services, Criminal Justice is one of them. Engineering and Transportation happens to be my committee. Budget Administration is another committee, and Land Use Planning is the other standing committee. So he'll assign a bill to one of those 4 committees. That'll be heard 2 weeks later at a committee meeting, typically, the last Tuesday of the month at 5:30 p.m. at the St. Joe County Council Chambers, which is on the same level as the City Council in South Bend, on the 4th floor of the County City Building. We just happen to have an office on the north end of the building. They're on the south end of the building. So 2 weeks from now, the bills that were introduced last night will have a hearing in committee. If that committee, which is a 7-member group, so 7 of the 9 council members are on each committee, if the 7 members agree to pass that bill out of committee and send it to the full council for a vote at the next council meeting, that could happen. Common bills, because we are county government, we're always constantly moving money around or making appropriations for new hires or changing somebody's budget. So those are what some of the common bills are that we might hear. So that bill will probably leave committee with a favorable recommendation to go to the full council, or an unfavorable recommendation, or the third option is it can be sent to the full council with no recommendation. Something that might be controversial, like a land use matter that not everybody can agree on, might be sent to the full council without a recommendation. So if that bill, the bills were introduced again last night, go out of committee the last Tuesday of this month, they will be heard at our May meeting. And our meetings always take place the second Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. in the St. Joe County, the county council chambers, which is the same as the city council. We share the chambers. So that's the process, essentially. Something more recent you might have heard about was the Human Rights Ordinance. Now, that was a more controversial ordinance and bill. I was one of the co-authors of that with Diana Hess and Raphael Morton. Our city council, these guys were bright light years ahead of us. They passed it a few years ago, and we wanted to pass it, but we finally got the momentum and the support to get it passed. So that one took 4 months to get it out of committee. There was a lot of resistance. There's a lot of controversy surrounding that from other outside interests. But after 4 months of hearing that in committee, it finally got out of committee with a favorable recommendation, and it was passed in February of this year, I believe. So now the county has a human rights ordinance, much like the city of South Bend. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell of the county. We're always welcome to input from citizens. If you want me to demonstrate our website, I can do it now or later. Which would you prefer, Doctor?
We'll do it in the next round, we'll each have 5 minutes to kind of tell people how they can track what's going on.
Sure.
You mentioned that people can come to the meetings. Is there a calendar that people have to keep in mind in the way that John Brody mentioned? They're only in session January through April. You better get your bill in ahead of time.
We're a part-time county, or part-time council essentially, but essentially we're meeting 12 months out of the year. So you don't have a deadline per se like the state legislature. So we're always, even though we have full-time jobs and we only meet twice a month for public meetings, you can always get a hold of us, and we can usually get something moving pretty quick if it's the desire of the council member you're asking to sponsor something. And just because I represent one geopolitical district in the county doesn't mean I'm only taking calls from my citizens or people in my area. I mean, somebody may not feel comfortable talking to their councilman, or somebody may not feel comfortable talking to me, so they'll call another council member up and say, hey, will you sponsor this bill for me? It does require a county council to sign the bill to get it for a public hearing. So anybody can draft the legislation. We just have to give it a look over by our legal counsel, and he or she will take a look at it and tell us if it'll be legally upheld if it is passed. And if so, then we will take that bill forward and go through our process.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll hear from Oliver Davis about the process at the city level and any things that we might particularly be interested in knowing or need to know if we want to make a difference.
Thank you, Dr. Binion. It's good to be here tonight with my guest, Honorable Judge Mark Catanzara of the County Council. Everybody probably has heard, if you haven't, I do like this phrase from Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. And it really is. When Senator Joe Donnelly votes on something, I can get yelled at in Walmart. When down in the State House votes on something, I get yelled at. School board, I get yelled at or get praised. Y'all in the county council, they don't know sometimes, but they know city council. They come. Our meetings, last Monday night we got out pretty early, got home at 9 o'clock, which was really nice. About 8:30, the meeting was over, so I talked a few minutes. But basically, for the meetings before that, we were getting out at 11:30, 12, 12:15. And I had to get up and go to Coke Quillard in the morning, told the little kids, I'm really tired this morning. But that's the way a city council meeting has been going, because all politics is local. And people bring to us everything, including the privilege of the floor, where they can come and share with us every kind of issue that they think is going on in the city of South Bend, St. Joe County, Mishawaka, Indiana, and every other place. And so we have 9 on the city council in the city of South Bend. It's always important to remember that a lot of us have South Bend addresses, but a lot of people do not live in South Bend. If your address has more than 4 digits, it was 1801, okay, that's where mine is, 1801 Nash Street, I'm in the city. If it's 1801 L, 18012, 5 digits, so whatever, you're in the county, even though you have a South Bend address. And that's very important. We ask you to identify yourself before you come, because when you have a county, then this is the guy over here, okay? And a lot of times people believe that because they're in the county, say, well, you changed my property taxes. That is true. The 2 of our councils came together. And so we have people coming from a lot of places that talk. But it's really important to know what district you live in. There's 6 districts in the city of South Bend. And in order to start making legislation move faster, it's good to know which one and where do you live. I'm on the southwest side, basically starting from Western Avenue, all the way back to the Rum Village area, far west over to where the New Martins is, to the east side, to Michigan Street. Then I jump over to Fellow Street to see you over there, right? I have a little pocket in the, I know, which a lot of us didn't realize. We thought that was 5th district for a while, but no, of course it's me. It's 6th district. And so that's really important, because when you are complaining about something, if somebody does not recognize where they are, then the importance may not be there. But when a person comes and they tell me they're on Fellow Street or they're on Dunham Street, today I've been getting emails about potholes and about sidewalks, all different during the day. People have my email, they have my cell phone. So through the day, this is going on, or you haven't done this, or you need to respond back to that. So yeah, it's been a whole sidewalk day on my, it really has been. And so, we are at the personal touch when it comes down to issues. When it comes, it's not so much bills that I've had to deal with a lot. It's the issue of ours come in the form of rates, from water rates to sewer rates to those kind of issues are where you get the big crowds. Because what happens in the state when they make all these changes about property taxes, then it affects us here. We get the blowback this way. People don't seem to get in the cars as much to go to Indianapolis. Okay, they come and they fuss with us. A lot of our resolutions that we may put together, we will then pass them on to downtown or to the downstate. but they start here. The difference of a resolution is it gives you the indication of where you want the council to go. The bill comes in, and that's where the council is now changing the laws when it comes down to issues of the smoking ban that's been put in place. We have a smoking ban that's been put in place, there are landlord bans that have been put in place, and all these kind of things. Those have become very challenging. And we have on our council 9 people, and 8 of them are registered Democrats. 1 is a registered Republican. Many times people would think that just because a party weighs now, that a lot of votes would be 8-1. That's not the way it is on local government. Local government, in the way we do it in the city of South Bend, is basically on what side of town you are. And so basically Dr. Varner and I, when it comes down to, he's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, south side of town, anytime somebody says something about the South affecting that, his ears open up and mine, he said, I got you. I said, I got you too, okay, on that side. So those become a key issue. And like I've had to share with some people when we're dealing with the Potawatomi Zoo situation, I was getting emails, that's not your side of town. You needed to stay quiet and stay on the southwest side. I said, yeah, but the whole city pays taxes into the zoo. And so I have a right to say, do we want to have a fire station in the zoo? But I had to remind them, the whole group of people who live right by the zoo are not the only ones who pay taxes to that area. We all pay city taxes. And so I did weigh in, and they had their say. Now we have a good compromise with that too. But the whole thing with the city government, we meet twice a month on the second Monday and the fourth Mondays of every month, except for December. We only meet the first Monday in the month of December. But outside of that, we meet twice a month. And on our Mondays start at 3:30. We have our committee meetings from 3:30 to about 6, where we have 11 different committees. Not all of them are heard on the same day, but several of them are heard, where we have our first readings, and we discuss them and discuss our committees. And then after that, we come back in the evenings and we continue to have discussions of what we talked about in the afternoon. You may come to a city council meeting and you hear, is there any thoughts from the council members? Nobody raises their hand. And it would seem like the council is not knowledgeable of what's going on. Oftentimes, it's because in the afternoon, we spent 2 hours debating at 3:30 to 5:30, so by the time we get to the 7 o'clock meeting, we kind of know who's losing, who's winning. And so it's not because there's not a lack of support or whatever, it's just the fact that we were there in the afternoon. That can be a challenge for some people. When I tell people if you have a bill, you have to double team your people. You have to have some people who come to the afternoon at 3:30, and you have people who come to the afternoon at 7. So those are important, because you may lose in the afternoon, but you can win in the morning, in the evening, or vice versa. So knowing that the 3:30 time, if a meeting is on the 24th of April, which is coming up, all of those different issues have to be into us by the Wednesday prior, which is going to be the 19th. Anything that happens, it has to be in or filed by the 19th for the first reading. So we can have a first reading that is going to be coming up by next Wednesday. You have to put it in. Then we have first reading for that following Monday. It may not make it depending on how much the agenda is, but that would be the soonest it could be heard would be that first Monday, which typically it is. Then at that meeting, we have first reading, and then we'll set it to a committee. And so if you put something for next Wednesday, it gets set to a committee for the first meeting in May, which would be the second Monday. I don't know that day right offhand. And then it would be probably heard on that second Monday to the fourth Monday for second and third reading. Depending on the friction, it could move on that day. When things are challenged, oftentimes they will be slowed down, which they should be. I'm encouraging more people, if it's a big fight, then we need to listen. If there's no opposition to a bill, and I figure the neighbors are not upset, why should I take the time to slow it down? Let's keep it rolling. But when people start showing up and sending letters, then we do those kind of things. So knowing the second and the fourth, those dates where we have those kind of different things are the key issues. But what you need to have when it comes to resolutions, again, which shows your intent, and then the different bills that come up, which really are the key thing. Again, we are a municipal body, which means that we act off the state legislature. We cannot pass certain bills, or we can. Some people can get away with home rule, but then by the time they're taken to court, if it's not in keeping with the state rules, then it can get overturned. So we have to always realize that the state bodies has ultimate authority over us. If we pass something and it's a 5-4 decision, the mayor, let's take for instance the water rates just had. We stayed up there for past 11 o'clock, and it was a 5-4 decision. The mayor could veto that. And then it would come back at the next meeting, and if the mayor does not get 6 votes, it is vetoed. If there are 6 votes, that can override a mayor's veto. So, or the pocket veto, or those kind of things that you heard about. So if a bill has 6 or more votes on it, it's pretty much the responsibility of that council. If it has 5 to 4, then it's up to the mayor to see if he wants or she wants to change those kind of things. Things to know about our local council.
Wonderful, and as you can see, things can move a lot quicker at the city and county level than they will at the state or the federal level. But with the state or the federal, I think, as Judge Broden said, you want to be persistent and not give up. The other thing I would just mention, Oliver mentioned districts, and people are representing their particular neighborhood, their particular community, and that's part of their charge as those are their constituents. But the 2 folks who were here last week, Karen White and Gavin Furlick, ran at large, which means they are to represent the interest of the city as a whole. And also, as Councilman Davis mentioned, there are a lot of services, city services, that everybody will have an interest in. Or there might be an issue that one member, even if he or she is not your representative, is passionate about and will lobby colleagues on. So that's always good to remember. The next question that I had for the panel that we want to discuss briefly before we go to your questions is how citizens can sort of keep track of what is happening with the city council, the county council, the state legislature, or in Congress. Most of us are interested in particular policy areas. What I have up on the screen right now is congress.gov, which is really very, very useful. There's also legiscan.com that some people find particularly useful. But what's nice is you can search by a subject, you can search by a bill name, you can search by sponsor in the House, sponsor in the Senate. You can look at when it was introduced. You can see what's still active instead of old things. You can look at the type of legislation. You can look and see, what's going on now with the Senate floor, the House floor. What are the committee hearings? What is the committee hearing schedule? So you can really see all these things here. You can not just find your representative, but again, you can search to see what they have actually sponsored. And so it is really nice. It also gives you information how to contact your legislator. And then you can go to Live House and you can see what's happening on the floor at any time. If you don't have C-SPAN, you can just watch on the website. Similarly with the Senate, they have a live stream, so you can actually watch what's going on and follow it right from the comfort of your own home. And so these can be really useful. The other thing that I think is useful is to think about other people who care about the same issues you do. Many groups have statewide and national members who track legislation. So the League of Women Voters, for example, will have members who are keeping track of in the State House and looking at all of the issues that might be important to that organization. Similarly with the Farm Bureau, similarly with Indiana University. We'll get a regular email saying, here are the bills that might impact higher education. Here's what happened this week in the legislature and what you need to know about. And so it can be very useful to join one of those listservs to get that information when somebody's already taking the time to go through and say, what's happening in that policy area that we think our members might want to know about. Let someone else do a little bit of that homework for you while not totally abdicating your responsibility in case they miss something. But that can make things much easier since we're all very busy. So I guess those would be my really quick tips on keeping track of what's happening, other than reading good news sources as well. But not everything gets covered, right, in the column inches and the broadcast minutes available. John, in terms of people wanting to follow what's happening, know what's happening, not miss out on a committee hearing they might be interested in, or showing up at the floor to show their support for a bill, it's the best way to kind of know what's happening.
Yeah, I was actually just looking at my phone because I usually kind of have these things saved to favorites. But the Indiana General Assembly actually has an outstanding website. It's received many, many awards. And it's basically in.gov, or you can Google Indiana General Assembly. With very few exceptions, I think it's down to like maybe 1 or 2 committee rooms. Basically, every committee hearing is live streamed. You just click on it and you can actually watch the committee hearing. Furthermore, both the action in the House and Senate chamber is live streamed as well, so you can watch that live. You can view the text of every single bill that's been filed. And this, I have to say, the Senate is a little more active than the House this year. The Senate filed 571 bills, an average of about 10 or more per, maybe about an average of about 11 per legislator. 654 in the House, so about 1,300 bills. You can look at the text of every single bill. You can see if it's scheduled to a hearing, see what committee it's been assigned to. You can look up bills that your legislator has filed. If you're curious about who your legislator is, you can put in your address and it'll tell you. You can locate who your legislator is. It's really a very good website and a very helpful website. One of the best things I have always found is if you click on the bill action list, it'll tell you, what the roll call vote was if the bill was moving. It'll tell you, whether it's been sent to the House, what committee. If a bill passes the Senate, of course, it gets sent to the House, and the Speaker of the House assigns it to a committee. You can see whether a Senate bill that passed the Senate chamber, how it's moving in the House. As I said, the only time this whole thing breaks down is when you get to the final 2 weeks in the conference committee, and then it's just kind of a free-for-all. But that might be fun to follow, but it is kind of crazy. But it's an excellent website, and I would strongly encourage people to, just tune in every once in a while and see what's happening. And it's a very good way to follow the General Assembly.
So you can see there, just searching for Tim Wesco, House Republican, Ryan Dvorak, House Democrat. You can see sort of what they may have sponsored, what their names are on. So if somebody tells you, yeah, I'm going to do that, and then you look, it's like, hey, nothing ever happened there. Or what did you actually put in that I lobbied for? So, and you saw right away the Watch Live feature that Judge Broden mentioned. So, great website. We can do lots of searches.
It's a very good website, yeah.
We just launched our new website, stjosephcountyiindiana.com, recently. It was kind of controversial because it was expensive, to the tune of $70,000, and the county commissioners wanted it, and they put the bill on it. So I have to type it for all you guys. See how I can. But I have to admit, it's a much better website than we previously had. Easier to find, other than our names along. That's the home page, and if you want to see individual departments, you click on this area and find an individual department. Many people use the services of our health department. They want to know about our history museum. These are the basic county departments of county government. Judge Broden's area would be the courts. Some folks have to use the courts. Here's the circuit court, which he presides over. I haven't seen your website yet, or your page.
We're very happy with it, seriously. It's helped a lot already for people that have questions about when their hearing is, where they need to go. We've noticed the website is very helpful.
On the government side, this is the governing board of the county. Much like Oliver described, once we pass a bill into law in county government, it becomes an ordinance, and it moves on to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners in St. Joseph County are the executive branch of county government. They're kind of the mayor of the county. It's 3 individuals that divide that power, and they can either affirm our decision and pass an ordinance we pass, or they can also veto it. We've had some recent things where they vetoed it, and it, just like the city council returns back to us on county council and have a 9-member board, our rules state we have to have a 2/3 majority in order to override a commissioner's veto. So the same thing can happen to us. But here's the county council. If you wanted to find out more about your county council members, here's our meeting schedule. Our public hearings are always at 6 p.m. Second Tuesday of every month, where our committee meetings are always held at 5:30 p.m. on the fourth Tuesday of the month. If you want to see our agendas and our minutes, there's a list of our 9 county council members. You can click on myself, for example, and you'll see there's my number to get hold of me. That's my home phone number. There's my address. If you want to know if you live in my district, you click on District G, and the map of my district should show up. I haven't done it this one. Oh, it's a print size. That's okay. It may be too big. We'll see. That's actually for printing. I'll go back. And one of the questions that asks you is, how do I find out? Oh, here's my county council member. So you can click there, and it's similar to the state website. You can either look at the map and figure out where you live if you want to do that, and scroll down and dial into where you live, or you can go up here and type in your address. I'll put my address in. Let's see, and it should tell me which district it's in. So it shows a picture of my house, and if I zoom out a little bit, I should see my district boundary, and I see that Corey Nolan is just, he's in the area above the blue line, and a guy named Mark Hansworth should be in the line below him. There I am. And my boundaries are different. Mine go from South Bend all the way out to Mishawaka. So even though I live in the city of South Bend proper, and even though I'm a county council member, our districts overlap the city. Keep that in mind, because you pay county taxes in the city, whether you live in the city or the unincorporated. So we're kind of an overarching governing body that covers not only people that live in the cities, but also unincorporated counties. So my district has a little bit of both. And then the other part that might be interesting to you is down here, there's maybe a controversial ordinance that's coming up, so our administrative assistant posted that. County council rules might be something you want to read, or look at the county code book. If you want to know what laws are on the book in the county, you click on that. And that will show you the county code book. There's our meeting schedule for the year for all 2017. If you want to know when we meet, so I'll have to open that. And there's the county council rules. And that tells you how a bill gets proposed and how it works through the process. If you want to view that through various sections. But that's our new website for the county, and it's much improved. Like Judge Broden said, I think people are happy with it. It's much more interactive, and you get a lot more information out of it. And that's, so if you didn't find your county council member, you want to ask, who to get a hold of, you could always just go to the county council administrative assistant. She could always direct you to, if you weren't able to figure that out. Call her directly at the office, and she could also tell you at this number here, 235-9658, she can tell you who your county council member is, or tell you how to reach one of us if you couldn't figure it out on the website.
Right, and the other thing you can do is to call actually the St. Joe County Voter Registration Office, and they're happy to help you identify and to actually tell you which district you're in for county council, which commissioners yours, which council members yours at the county level and the city level. And they are happy to do that because they know sometimes these GPS maps can be a bit tricky for people to negotiate in, and it is a relatively new tool.
I agree. Also, I'm sure you've probably seen them, the League of Women Voters Voter Guide is a nice booklet that they publish every couple of years, an update that lists everybody's contact information and every unit of government within St. Joseph County and maybe beyond a little bit. It's a great
And that is a
reference.
guide I brought last week with some hard copies. It's also available online at lwvsouthbend.org. I'll try to bring back some more hard copies next week because it does list everybody. It also lists the times of all of those public meetings so that you have it all in one place, as well as all the voter registration rules, the election rules, lots and lots of information about the judiciary here in St. Joe County. So it is a really helpful, neutral source that simply has directory information that you would need to contact your elected officials.
I use it a lot, personally.
All right, and so now Oliver is going to take a few minutes to talk to us a little bit about keeping track of what's going on in the city council, and then we'll take your questions. So be thinking of those in these next few minutes.
Thank you. You can go to your southbendin.gov, and you can click onto the Common Council. You see the list of the 9 of us, along with our legal staff that we just had. We're getting a new one now, and our city clerk. And if you go down our list here, these are some of the key things that have gone on in our area. This lists all the 2017 ordinances and then the 2017 resolutions. As you can see, when we talked about the resolutions are limited to internal affairs, basically giving us an intent of where you want to go. And the ordinances that we basically deal with, establish fees, regulate conduct, establish penalties, required for passage of budgets. We deal with salaries and zoning changes. I chair the zoning committee for the last 5 years, and we just have everything with the Matthews, the apartments, and all the zoning laws become a very serious battle. Trust me. And then on here you see the council members. You can, each one of us have our districts that we have. This is me. And you can go representing the different 13, the number 13 in the city of South Bend. 06 means that is 6th district. There are 6-1, 6-2. My precinct is 607. That's the fire station up Prairie. And so this shows you where your precincts and where you vote. And then each one of us have something about our background. Our addresses are public. We're truly public officials. People come to the house and say hi.
So anyway, if somebody wants to track what's happening, they can actually ask you.
They can actually ask us. I mean, my cell phones and telephone numbers and all these things are there. I went on to the city. We also have a Facebook page, many of you know about. And you can go on our city, South Bend. If you're on Facebook, go there and you can log into different issues and comments that we follow. I personally, myself, keep everybody up to date with what goes on in my life or a lot of things. I have mine that says Councilman Oliver Davis speaking up for South Bend. People come on there and say things. That's my personal one for people to come in. So you have city council members that do that. Some will do that part of it. Others will, the main one is for everybody. And then, of course, we have Twitter, as President Trump, we all know, has already found out, is the new way of life again. Social media is the way people are contacting a lot of us through emails, through text messages, social media, sharing their thoughts. So even years ago, if the paper didn't endorse you, you were done. Now, social media is really the way that people turn on the news and find out what's saying yes, or who said no, or those kind of things. So these are some of the key ways to track us.
Okay.
There's a close out here, so you want to see all my stuff.
All right, wonderful. So now we move to your questions. Squeak.
When Judge Roden was talking, he talked about laws. Mr. Kensright mentioned codes, and Oliver Davis just mentioned ordinances. Can you guys kind of clarify the differences? I know the codes, you can't put a campaign sign or a realtor sign on your parkway or your tree line, but when I tell people it's against code, they say, I don't care about the code. Is that a law? I mean,
Great question. And I will repeat it because this will also help for anybody who will watch later on video form. The question is that she heard law at the state level. She heard the word ordinance at the local level. She heard the word code at the county level. And sometimes someone might say, well, I don't care what code says. That's just a code enforcement issue. I'm not breaking a law. And so are all of these, is an ordinance or a code a law? Is there different language that's used at different levels? And is it meaningful in a way that citizens should understand?
Your Honor, want to answer that?
Well, my answer probably won't be the best one, but from a legalistic standpoint, I mean, I kind of view it as what what people refer to as jurisdiction. And each of us, when I was a General Assembly member, Mark as a county council member, Councilmember Davis as a city council member, there's jurisdictional issues. But a city ordinance is law. I mean, you know, you have a curfew law, and if you're out after curfew and you're in the city of South Bend and you're 14 years old and it's Tuesday night and it's 1 a.m., the South Bend police officer can write you a curfew because the city of South Bend has a curfew ordinance. It's law. They're really just terms. In the General Assembly, we call them laws. Some people call them statutes. There is something called the Indiana Code. They usually start IC. County does use the term ordinance. Sometime you're in Chicago, they use a different term. I'll hear it when I'm listening to the Chicago radio or something like that. They may refer to theirs as enactments or something like that. So really, it's now
Statutes.
if your son or daughter is out in the unincorporated area, I don't know. Does the county have a curfew ordinance? I don't even know.
We don't have a curfew
Don't
ordinance.
have a curfew.
that I'm aware of.
So if you live in the county, your kids can stay out all night, and they're
Well,
not
that's a good idea.
the ordinance.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, go ahead and plan one. That's why it's safer living in the city.
Which I think it's a great point, though. I think it's a great point because, that was one of the things that I found most frustrating for people who file things like, they would say, well, I'm talking to you. Why can't you do something about this? Well, people get frustrated when and you try to help them as best you can, but a lot of people can't keep straight, understandably so. I don't think it's purposely made difficult, but as Councilmember Davis said, all politics is local, and there are some things. Now, there are some things that I know the General Assembly gets very frustrated because they'd like to do something, but if the state has acted in that area, they preempt, and just like Congress preempts the states, if the state legislature, which quite candidly they've been doing more and more lately, they could pass a state law saying there's a state curfew, and the city can't enact a more restrictive curfew ordinance, and they've done that, and they haven't done it in curfew, but they've done it in a number of other areas. Alcoholic beverages, minimum wage, there's a lot of things that the state can take away, just as the locals can take away from the state, and there's those tensions. So I'm sorry, that's a long answer, but the short answer, Squeak, is typically they are law, whether they're called ordinance, but as to whether it impacts what group of people sometimes can be jurisdictional based on where you reside or where you are at that particular point in time.
The other thing that is probably important for people to keep in mind is the difference between criminal laws and civil laws. But either way, you could end up in front of a judge. It's just whether you'll get a fine or you could get actual jail time. And so sometimes people don't take those civil laws quite as seriously, but in fact, they have the force of law, even if the penalty is different. Okay. You're in the back.
Who generally writes the bill?
Who generally writes the bill?
Yeah, who will be, because I have heard that on the national level that lobbyists are actually writing bills for different congressmen or senators.
Well, in the city of South Bend, each council person probably, depending on how they look at life, some will try to do it themselves, all by themselves. Those of us who have learned a little bit more wisdom on that will do it and have our attorneys to look at it, and then they help us to model, because a lot of the bills may not necessarily even be original. They may be from another county, from another city that we can adapt and we can massage them and try to apply it to the city of South Bend. With the human rights ordinance, they can share back and forth, and so a lot of things.
We copied many portions of our human rights ordinance came from the city of South Bend.
And then we can look at the nuisance ordinance came from, I believe, out in some of the Seattle, somewhere in Washington State. I forgot the exact city. And so we adapted it to the city of South Bend. So you will take a look at that, and when we put together a resolution is a different ballgame. A lot of the resolutions start with us. And because again, it gives us the intent of where we want to go. It doesn't have to everything be what's the law. And this is where we like to go. When you're getting down to ordinance, you need to know what state law, and is this in agreement with state law, or if it's not in agreement, if it's challenged, again, if somebody violates it, what's going to happen? We put this law in place and they violate it, and it comes before the circuit court. will we have any teeth to hold it? If it's just something that somebody may say home rule, and they're looking at Indiana code. And so typically that will trump us, or go over us in these days. I don't like to use that word.
Some of you may be familiar with Valerie Shea. When she ran for council, she really had one policy that she was particularly interested in, which was getting rid of breed-specific legislation. So that pit bulls weren't treated differently just because they were pit bulls, but it was more conduct and behavior-based. And so she looked at different policies in different places, the communities that had policies that she wanted to be more like, and then use that to draft the bill, just as Councilman Davis was saying. And so that's quite often what happens at the local level. Now, at a state level and a national level, particularly in controversial issues, we do have some groups who will say, here's a model bill, and occasionally that comes to light because they forget to take off the logo of the group that provided it, or to change the name of the legislator or the state. So occasionally that happens. From my understanding is in the Indiana General Assembly, that's by no means a majority of bills that are passed, but what would you say to that?
Well, the one that's been most notorious, and perhaps what you may be referring to, and they're not the only group that does it, but there's a group called the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, and they're known for having seminars that attract many, many legislators. They happen to be a conservative group. I'm sure there are liberal groups out there. They either haven't been as successful or they're not as organized, but they will put together what they call model legislation on a whole host of issues. It's all fair. I mean, there's nothing illegitimate about it. I mean, you can be a little upset that it kind of lacks originality, that people are just, cutting and paste. Now, from a formal standpoint, no bill can become law in the Indiana General Assembly without being first submitted to the Indiana Legislative Services Agency, which is a nonpartisan entity made up of lawyers who are bill drafters, and that's really to make sure the Indiana Code conforms and that the terms are consistent. They do an outstanding job. But if you're a legislator who has gone to an American Legislative Exchange conference or something like that, and someone has given you model legislation, you can simply hand it to the legislative services attorney who will tweak that to make it comport with Indiana law. But that has happened. But as Dr. Benyon has said, it's by no means the majority, but it does happen.
I feel like one of the takeaways from today is just an awareness of how much of the decision-making and debate process happens at the committee level. And I wondered if Mr. Cantor and Mr. Davis would comment on, if I wanted to offer input at that level, it sounds like we should, what does that look like? When we watch the news and we see what it looks like at the full council, I'm standing at a podium and I have a few minutes at the microphone. But committee sounds a little more mysterious. Does it look the same? Is it something more written? Like, what should I be doing if I want to do that?
Let me quickly repeat the question, just in case folks who may do this later can't hear it. So our previous question was about who actually writes the legislation. This question is about the fact that it sounds like a lot of things happen in the committee level, and the committee level is very important. If a citizen wants to intervene or speak out or be heard at the committee level, is that possible? And what does that look like? It seems a bit mysterious. We're less familiar with that. We don't see that on television.
From the county level, give you a little background on that. The public is not allowed to comment during the committee meeting per se. The public can attend the committee meeting. We're limited in space. We've got about a 44 seating capacity in that room. But on controversial issues, you'll see the public get there, and other people that are no longer having their bills before us will vacate the room, so they'll make room for people. So if you can't necessarily comment on it, you can at least come and hear what the debate's about. Outside of the committee meeting, people can contact their council members, write letters, email, and those emails, if you email the county council's administrative assistant, she'll forward them to each one of us. But there really is no process at the committee level when a bill's in committee from the county council perspective for the public to be able to speak about it. That takes place at the public hearing, which is when the bill comes out of committee, or if it comes out of committee. When there's a public hearing, we listen to people who want to speak in favor or against a bill, and we allow them typically 3 minutes per person to speak about their issue with the bill. Prior to that, though, let me say, we would have gotten phone calls, letters, emails sent to us from groups if it was a very controversial issue. And we listen to that and we help use that information for us to make a decision on how we vote that night. But on the county council level, there's no provision for the public to speak. The only people during the committee that can speak is the sponsor of the bill, or if it's a land use matter, the person that's coming to us for a land use issue, they can speak. And then we as council members can ask them questions. But the real chance for the public to speak is at the public hearing, when you can let us know whether you're against or for a bill.
If I can follow up, is it true then that before the public hearing, the committee has already issued either its favorable or not favorable recommendation, or is that?
Correct. Favorable, unfavorable, or no recommendation, the three things that can happen in committee. Or if nobody makes a motion, the bill can just stay in committee indefinitely.
So to influence then either the favorable or not favorable recommendation, my input would really need to be written, like either by phone or by email or whatnot, before even the committee hearing happens.
That's true, but let me say this to you, though. There have been bills that have come out of committee favorably that have been voted down at the council level. So just know that just because of the recommendations, favorable, unfavorable, or without recommendation, it doesn't necessarily mean the vote's going to go that way. It might give us an idea, like Councilmember Davis alluded to earlier, if no citizens contact us by email, phone, or letters, and nobody's there to oppose something, then we pretty much think there's no opposition to a particular bill. If it seems to be good public policy, then we'll pass it.
With the city council, that's one of the reasons why we have longer meetings, is because the public hearing is allowed at committees. Oh yeah. Why do you think we go to 12 o'clock? I mean, we have to bring the food in there sometimes just to keep it through. From 3:30 to about 6, you hear the presenter, a person, and then we ask for those who speak in favor and those who speak against. And when there are major issues, we meet in a small room too, but then because of the fire regulations, we move into the major chamber. So we can have a committee in the afternoon that is sometimes larger than the evening meeting that night. And that has happened on several occasions. And so when people really who advocate well, and I tell them, you come to the afternoon meeting because the people need to be heard. And oftentimes, even we will probably limit some of the topics in the afternoon just because of the nature of time. But people will still be able to hear, we'll hear a few from those who are pro, from those who are against, and then we would respectfully ask the larger groups of people to share their thoughts that evening. If it's a day that we don't have as much on the agenda, you probably won't hear them speak twice and give their same speeches on both sides of the aisle that night too. So they have prior to the meetings where they email us, call us on the phone, work, come by the house, and call your job, and do everything else. And then they come to the committee meeting, and then they come to the floor at 7 o'clock and prepare to stay until whenever. So those are the kind of things. I think we're one of the only committees that I know that allow public hearing all the way through like that. And so again, that's why you hear that kind of challenge in the issue sometimes at the city council level throughout the whole concept, more so than my other colleagues.
Well, also, if you think that somebody or a particular group is an expert on the issue, council member might actually ask them to come and speak at
That is correct.
committee meeting before you decide what your recommendation will be.
Because oftentimes we would ask for certain groups to come in to help us have some insights on different bills that we've had and to write. I see some of our colleagues when we worked on this summer. We had different people from different experts come in and talk in the committee levels. Because we had the Sierra Club on one side, AAP on another, and that took about 4 or 5 committees before we even took it back to the floor. Because those two see life completely different.
All right, and we have...
Yes, could I just point out,
yes.
just out of curiosity, because when I heard the local council members speak at the state level, the only opportunity for public input is at the committee process. Once a bill goes to the floor of either the House or the Senate, you can go in the chamber, but you got to button your lip. In fact, if you talk, they'll remove you. So the opportunity for public input at the state legislative level, I assume which mirrors the federal level, is at the committee level.
So that's why when you hear more active county with the state, you see where the politics goes that way.
Well, and it is interesting, remember how many things die at the committee level in the state house. So it is important to get there, and that doesn't necessarily mean that your bill will be reported to the floor, but at least it gives it a little bit of a better chance, and then you can try again the next session. So I saw David and Cheryl, and then Danielle. Okay, so we will take David's question first.
I've got two questions, but one of them real quick. Will you talk about the fiscal cliff? That's the quick question. The second question is, way back before y'all were even born, I was a juvenile probation officer. And in those days, when the probate court judge mandated a course of treatment, shall we say, on behalf of a juvenile offender, the state was, the county was, the state was mandated to pay that bill. If it was for the good of the child, then there was no financial limit. Now, I didn't hear, very often about a penthouse in Chicago or anything like that, but nevertheless, when someone had to get a specialized course of treatment, whether that was psychological or physical, the state was mandated. That is apparently not true anymore. Fiscal cliff, the good of the child.
Fiscal cliff, I was at a meeting with Transpo. We met with our lobbyist team this afternoon. Basically, it's saying that in property taxes in 2020, what we passed, it's a House Bill 1001 that came out that we had to change property rates here, and that we're going to have some major financial crises that will be coming up in the year 2020. There's been different thoughts on that. I mean, right now, the state is even reporting a better financial success this year. We had more money coming back now. So the question is still out there with the UMBA. We're getting UMBA reports and some of the other county reports to see how true or how much teeth that will be, because it will have some impact, but the question is how much. And that's still unknown, to at least from this afternoon, from the questions I asked. And that's really important as we look at the 2018 and 2019 and 2020's budget, because we need to really be able to prepare for that. In 2008, we raised the taxes, we did everything else. That was some interesting times. But it helped the city of South Bend, and well, this whole area, stay afloat through all of these different situations. And so we are not as strapped as some of the counties to the west of us because of what we did, even though it was a hot and heated issue. And so that's how I would answer that. Anybody else want to talk about the fiscal cliff?
I would just say at the county level, we've been paring down our budget every year in anticipation of that. I think the economy, like Oliver alluded to, the anticipation of what happens in St. Joseph County, Indiana in particular, and Lake County, Indiana. We were able to take anything that we had bonded for and put that outside of the tax levy, so that was actually not counted against our tax levy. So up until 2020. So anything that remains outside of our tax levy in 2020 will come back on the tax levy. So we'll have to absorb that within our budgets that we've all passed. So that being said, we're looking to make 5 to 7% cut in county government over the next couple of years in our budgetary process. We've been doing that gradually, about 2% last year. We're hoping probably to do, I'm guessing the numbers haven't come out yet for this year, but probably 2% this year, and maybe an additional 2 in 2019. So I think, given the state of our current economy, if things keep going well like they are, it won't have as much of an impact as we were concerned about. However, we're still making the cuts in anticipation of that coming down. Hopefully you won't notice it on the street in terms of the level of service you're getting. We certainly wouldn't want to cut any essential services like law enforcement or courts, where something, or health department, where something major could come from seeing a cut in those areas. You might see it in maybe leisure activity or parks, which you hate to say you're going to cut maybe in a park, but is that essential to people's health and well-being or their public safety? Maybe it's essential to our well-being, our mental well-being, to have good park facilities. But you might see decisions being made that trying to prioritize what is important and what is not. And just to get back, I don't want to take much more time, but the gentleman's question about committee debate, county council, a recent example of where a bill hasn't even been introduced yet, we revamped our county animal control ordinance. And that was a controversial, lengthy 4 or 5, 6 month meeting process with interested people and stakeholders at the meetings. And so we haven't even got that. It just got introduced at our council meeting Tuesday night last night, the ordinance of that. So citizens had a chance, and groups that were interested and stakeholders had a chance to actually have input on crafting the new animal control ordinance in St. Joe County that'll be introduced. It was introduced last night. They'll be voted on in May or whenever that happens. And I do want to stand correct. I made a mistake earlier. I erred when I said we don't have a curfew ordinance in the county. We do. I used our county's website and looked it up. It predates me on the council, and I've been around for quite a while, but it predates my tenure on the council. But we do have a county curfew.
What time you have to be in bed?
11 o'clock if you're under.
Oh, cool.
If you're under 15. But as far as the question about juvenile probation, the juvenile court judge does make the order for where he wants the juvenile to be detained or treated, and the state was on the hook for those bills in the past, but I think there's a state law change that changed that and put it back on the counties, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know if Judge Broden can speak to that or not.
Yeah, very, very briefly, the state took the county welfare property tax levy away, so the state sends the money to the local units. The big change has been, it used to be the probate judge could say, I think this child would be best served if you replaced at this home in Arizona. If the state has crammed down what they pay providers, and so they've limited the providers, so now if a juvenile judge sends a child to a placement that's not approved by the state, then unfortunately that's when the county's on the hook, and a lot of these placements are like $300 per day. It's been a loser for kids in St. Joseph County. It's probably been a benefit for kids in some other counties. Services in St. Joseph County at the local level were very well supported. Some other counties were not so helpful to their juveniles, so there's been winners and losers, but the state's taken over child welfare.
What I'd like to do next is to, with the panelists' permission, get the questions that people have, and then those who are able to stay and want answers to those questions, will extend time for 10 minutes or so to talk about those. We will not stay beyond 8:15, but we can hear what questions they'll be answering if everybody is okay extending time, 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, and we had Cheryl and
used to be in that long
Danielle
meetings.
and over here. Okay, and okay, these 4 questions. So your questions first, and then we'll get the answers.
I just wanted to say, you say lobbyists write things. Well, I think John will agree. We handed you the bill that we wanted, the students and I who helped me with food stamps, and we actually handed them a packet with information and a bill. So it's not just lobbyists who can hand a bill. And the second thing I want to reiterate is when it comes to the conference, because this was new for me, and one time I went to the conference committee at the state level, and you need to be prepared because I remember I was told, we'll be calling you during the conferencing. And I got like 6 calls, and there was a state representative who was assigned, and he'd come out of that conference committee, and he'd call me on the phone, and he'd ask me a question. And I was scrambling around through my papers, you know what I'm saying, trying to find the answers. So if your bill gets through the Senate, and it gets through the House, and it goes to committee, you need to be ready to take a call from someone in that committee, because they will call and ask you questions. And I wasn't ready for that. And
Great tip. Danielle?
I don't think it's a difficult question, but I live in a really small town in St. Joseph County. We don't have a website like that. There's no town newsletter. There's no public announcement system. The only way you can access the minutes is by going to the town hall when they happen to be open. Is there any rule about how public the minutes have to be? And then the second part of that is, most of the time the town council meetings are just consent agendas, and they're like 6 to 10 minutes. So how can we find out what's going on when that's the only public information we get?
Openness in government and government transparency.
I would check with Your,
We'll get the questions and then we'll get your
Gotcha.
answer. So save that thought.
who's that state, what's the guy's state?
Luke Britt.
I just want to get back to the physical foot question. Because all of you have been through the process, especially in sports. What are the chances of ever getting some of that funding back? I realize it went into the state constitution. I just see the devastating effects it's having on our school budgets, on every aspect of our lives. Is it hopeless?
So the question is about the fiscal cliff again, because those property tax caps are put into the state constitution, is there any hope of getting any of that money back? What can local communities do in terms of funding their schools, libraries, et cetera? And we had one up here.
Yes. What I have is something to go about, and I was just asking for the public servants to give us a tip or best practice. So when we're contacting you or coming to the hearing, what is the best way to get you all seriously to give us a list for a bill or whatnot?
Okay, so building on last week's session, but with a completely new set of elected officials, what is the best way to approach an elected official to really have them hear you and to have the best opportunity to actually influence their decision-making and behavior in the policy-making process? So we have about 10 minutes, and some of these are pretty quick. So we'll first start with this idea of public transparency, public minutes. What if your process happens so quick that you can't even get there before the consent agenda has been passed and there's no website? Thank you all for coming in, and please leave your series. We hope to see you next week. Okay, so extended questioning. John?
Well, I think Oliver and Mark both had a very good suggestion. Luke Britt is the public access counselor. If indeed there may be issues as to whether they're not in compliance with public notice requirements and that type of thing. Furthermore, if the town, irrespective of their size, if they're taking any action that impacts people by way of a law or anything like that, there are rules that are in both the state constitution as well as the state statute that have to be followed. Now, someone has to challenge them, if they have a problem with it, but that's why the city council, county council has things like, the legislature has like first reading, second reading, third reading. There are requirements that have to be followed. If you don't follow those, your law can be stricken down.
What was the name?
Luke Britt.
Britt, B-R-I-T-T.
Yeah, he's the public sector.
He's the state. IN.gov, PAC, Public Access Counselor. I just pulled up, he's on the state website, you can get a hold of him.
And you tell him this, what's the situation, give him a summary, and then he'll respond back to you.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Formal complaint form is available online. Yep, right there.
Wonderful. The next question was about that fiscal cliff. It's in the state constitution, the property tax cap. Is there any hope of reversing it, getting that money back, or do the local levels need to be more creative, and to what extent are your hands tied? So
The key way of reversing major legislation is on election day, whether it's primary or whether it's the fall. And that's just the nature of what happens. When you have, that's what's going on from the national level right now, as they try to reverse different things with the Affordable Care Act. And so that's the major way, because when people come in, state of Indiana right now, basically has gone red. And it's, even in the State House, when you have 40 to 10, the chances of you dealing with legislation that's going to be reversed is very limited. And so you have to figure out a way, if you're going to do that, is to suggest something that a person on the right can see some differences. And there was a resolution that just came before the city council regarding the gun legislation. I voted against it with NRA. Can you believe it here? I'm a Democrat doing that. But the reason I did is because of the fact that I want to challenge some people on the left to have to craft legislation that's not so far to the right in the state that we have in Indiana, because then they're not going to hear you. What's the need of passing something on the city level, something to the far left, and you get down on the state, they're not going to even look at it. You got to say to them, we may not necessarily come completely over, but how can we have a bipartisan issue on this? So let's work to craft some legislation that's going to be heard. And let's not have a big celebration over legislation that is going to be to the far left and the state of Indiana is not going to pass. So we have to be more creative from the left, recognizing that we are in a state that's on the right and helping our people on the right to be able to deal with things. That's why I brought Dr. Varney in when it came to Sierra Club. Say, how can I present this bill to you, I'm far on the left, that you're going to listen to it and you're on the right? And he gave me some pointers to look at. And I started working on crafting a legislation, something that I would not have done if I was in a state that was all to the left. But recognizing where we live and trying to have some working relationship, which is almost a thing of the past now when it comes to politics.
Okay, I would say your question is an excellent one. I would say to the extent you're interested in the issue, your time would be much better spent looking at creative ways to come up with different revenue sources for local units of government, because the property tax caps, as you noted, were done through constitutional amendment. The constitutional amendment process takes 5 years at a minimum. The identical language has to pass 2 different sessions of the General Assembly, and that doesn't just mean back-to-back years. It means 2 differently elected sessions of the General Assembly, and then that only puts it on the ballot to be voted on at the next election. So even if things go as smoothly as possible, it's a 5-year process. Secondly, as Councilmember Davis pointed out, the practical situation is it passed with like 80% of the vote. So, I mean, even if you had some sea change in the General Assembly, you have to change people's minds. So, things that I think are you do see local units of government generating public will to support additional school referendums. There are things like a food and beverage tax. There's different ways to raise money for your local units of government outside of the property taxes, and that has to be where time has to be spent.
Cool.
Okay, and next week's session is going to be on protesting safely and effectively when you don't feel like your voice is being heard. But the last question of the evening is how to make your voice heard so that you don't necessarily need to be out in the streets protesting, but maybe you might actually influence a legislator to move your idea forward. So your best tips, how somebody should approach you if they really want you to listen to them. John Roden, for you, obviously, when you were in the legislature, we won't get into a discussion of how you try to influence a judge. I'm not suggesting that.
Become busy in jail, really?
So as a state legislator, we'll start with you and then we'll go hear from each of you in turn.
Well, the best way to interact with the state legislator is, first of all, I think people underestimate their power and their influence, and I mean that very sincerely. State legislators, like all legislators, but almost more so, are very skittish about where public opinion is on something. So it is worth your while to contact your local legislator, and they are in the community. Email is good, particularly if it's not form email. Letters are still good. They're not out of date, and people look at, is this person in my district? Those still work. If you're interested in an issue that is bigger than just in your local area, networking with other like-minded groups is a very excellent way to move legislation. If it's a problem in South Bend, it's likely a problem in Fort Wayne. If it's a problem in Fort Wayne, it's likely a problem in Evansville. And so you need to be hearing it from different parts of the state because we're talking about state law. But the best ways to interact with your legislature really has not changed over time. Take advantage of the fact that they're in the community, that most of them are involved in various things, and they're accessible, the vast majority of them. New tools such as email are helpful. Doing the email blast, H1 through H100 and S1 through S50, a little less, because frankly, if I'm getting an email from French Lick, Indiana, I just don't have time. So, keep it local. Focus on your people. If it's a statewide issue, network with other like-minded groups.
When you find out where they go to church or where they eat their breakfast and come and say hello.
When you call people, identify who you are. Tell them your name, your address, and those are important. Because when I just get a phone call and say hi, and they start fussing or start sharing something, and I say, what is your name? Well, it's not important. Well, it is important. because I may need to call you back. If you're building a consensus, I need to know your name. If I'm a public official, so you need to at least be able to clarify something about your name and a telephone number, because then this may be coming from those paid consultants from all over the state and other places and some, high price. When this person is down the street from me and they can talk, it's a different conversation, because I said, let me take your name and I'll call you back, and we may have different conversations. And invite people to your church, let them get a chance to know you, your groups, the different activities. If you have a neighborhood group, some neighbors that y'all want to invite. I've been invited to different neighborhoods here and say, we are about 20 neighbors to get together, can you come over? Those old-fashioned relationship things still work today.
Absolutely.
And then, when you see somebody, support them. Support them, because when you're asking them to take on some issues, whatever that supports, come to the meetings, have people there, they wear red t-shirts, wear green t-shirts, whatever they want to do. Stand up there, because when that legislature had to take on heat, then people are going to come and say, well, we're going to remember your election. And be sensitive to the times of election. I told one group, 208, once you get elected, you can have some of the tough legislation. 209, some tough. 210, 211, election year, please don't come. Then come back to 212, tough again. Understand the political cycle of where your people have to deal with, because to take on a very hot issue right before an election, well, you've just probably asked them to commit suicide, and that's not fair. And so a person's going to ask you to do that. Know their political cycle. You don't sell Halloween stuff at Christmas or Easter at time. So know the political weather, the political time when you're going to ask that question. It helps us out.
Great, so the calendar in terms of the state legislature, the budget cycle, and also the political business cycle, and Mark Catanzaro, your
I agree with what both my colleagues have said here. Certainly, like-minded individuals or groups, if you have an issue, for example, getting back to the human rights ordinance, we had the Southern Human Rights Commission director and his board members contact us about how many human rights complaints they were getting in the county and in Mishawaka who didn't have a human rights ordinance. So they brought that to a council committee meeting and gave us a presentation on that. At our council committee meetings once a month, we have a period of time at the end of our council committee meetings. We allow people, if you have an issue before you, you've got a leaf problem in your neighborhood, you've got a neighborhood issue with a neighbor with trashy property, or if you have a group you belong to and you want to come give a presentation to us, we allow 15 to 20 minutes at the end of each one of our council committee meetings for a group to come in and speak to us about whatever issue they want to. They just have to schedule with our administrative assistant, and our council president is usually very open about doing that. And that's usually kind of a launching point of somebody wanting us to make a change to an existing ordinance or to create new legislation or a new ordinance. So that would be another way of doing something like that. Obviously, like John said, snail mail is great. It's still very popular, still very effective. Emailing or getting a hold of our staff. Our staff does not get a hold of us. And again, all of us council members, at least I am, my home phone number is on there and my address is on there. So it's not uncommon, like Oliver alluded to, people will knock on your door, people will stop you at the grocery store, or they'll call you at home, and we're open to all those means of communications because we pledge to be accessible, and that's part of what we do.
I think it is interesting that one of the lessons that I'm also hearing, thinking back to last week and this week, is some of the council members want you to connect with them on social media, others by email, others enjoy like the hard copy mail and your handwriting if it's very legible, and so asking them how they wish to be contacted or asking others who have been effective in working with them might be a good idea. Okay, final?
Yeah, can I just interject something real quick if you don't mind? Like Judge Bergen was saying, the one thing that you also have to know is there are 800 members at the state level, and you can call your senator or your rep on the state level to an 800 number. But the other thing to remember would be they each person that you're contacting, if you contact a legislative assistant, and that's usually who will end up with the messages, they serve more than one legislator. It's not like Congress where they have multiple people on staff. A state legislator will have a staff person that he or she shares with one or three others. And that legislative assistant also does work such as staff committees, do some research, and they take care of a multitude of things. So it is, if they don't call you back between 8 and 5, generally, especially during session, it might be 8 or 9 o'clock at night because they're still working as well.
So keep that in mind when you're looking for answers or you're looking for information. It's going to take a while when they're in session, especially during conference committee, because they're doing other things, but the 800 number is available. Just leave your name and which legislator you want. Leave a message for, or they won't know that either.
Great point. The state legislative aides are overworked, and they might take some time to get back to you. So a couple of more things come to mind from last week, which is be persistent, but not pestering, and be polite, that everybody likes to be treated with respect. And so that brings this session.
Might I just bring up one more thing?
Sure.
And just keep in mind, this is a off-election year in our county. There's no elections taking place this year. Some of you may want to run for office. That's another way of getting involved. And on the county level, we have elections coming up again in 2018. So half of the county council will be up for re-election in 2018, as well as some county commissioners. So if you're interested in running for office, learn more about that. You've got a couple of years to gear up for it. That's another option for you to get involved or to have your point of view heard, is to get elected to office.
City council comes in 2019. All the city council members, the clerk, and the mayor is up in 2019.
We are lacking diversity on the county council. It's a bunch of guys that look like me, except for one woman. And we have one African American. We need more diversity in the county council, so I would welcome more women, more people of color, more people of diversity to come to the county council and join us. We need some more help.
The League of Women Voters Guide, again, I'll try to bring some hard copies of the 2017 edition and put them out on the table again next week. It also indicates when everybody is up for re-election. So thank you so much for coming. Please leave your survey. Next time we'll take out some of those events that have already passed to give you more time to share your ideas about what we should do in the future. And let's thank our panelists. Thank you from the American Democracy Project and St. Joseph County Library. Come back and see us next week.
Dr. Bidden, would you take a picture?
Yes.